Hello there and welcome to our nightly news program, coming to you live on All 24 News from Algiers. Next are the headlines. The conflict in Sudan enters its second week despite international calls for immediate ceasefire. Countries begin to evacuate their nationals, and World Food Programme expects more refugees to arrive in Chad. Also coming up, the United States renews its full support for the efforts of the United Nations to decolonize Western Sahara. Palestinians in Gaza Strip celebrate Eid al-Fitr despite the repercussions of the blockade imposed on them. Also ahead in our news. And Australia announces the discovery of a shipwreck 8 decades after the worst maritime disaster in the country's history. Hello again and welcome to the program. First off in our topical news, Algerian President Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune received a phone call from former Qatari Emir Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Thani. According to a statement by the Algerian presidency, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Thani congratulated President Tebboune and the Algerian people on the occasion of the blessed Eid al-Fitr, wishing Algeria more sophistication and prosperity. To other topical news now, the conflict in Sudan enters the second week as the country lives a severe humanitarian crisis despite international calls for ceasefire. The country has seen the evacuation of at least 10,000 people to its neighboring country, Chad. However, the catastrophic humanitarian situation remains one of the most difficult challenges for people. Here's Osama Ayadi with more.
Conflict between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces enters the second week as the two parties continue their rift over reaching power in the country. Gunfire echoed through Khartoum and a blast sent a thick plume of black smoke rising across the skyline despite warring factions announcing a truce to coincide with the Muslim three-day Eid celebrations.
According to our sources here in Khartoum, the clashes are still going on in Khartoum, Durman and also Bahri. Durman right now is witnessing heavy clashes around the National Radio building in Durman, and also Khartoum, of course, is still witnessing clashes around the General Army Command. Now, as I am talking to you, I am hearing now sounds of gunshots that are approaching. Here in Khartoum, the humanitarian situation is still difficult. People are still suffering.
The World Health Organization reported on Friday that 413 people had been killed and over 3,500 injured since fighting broke out 6 days ago, noting that death toll includes at least 5 aid workers.
We do have those numbers, and not surprisingly, they have increased. We have 4 people injured, and they come from, these really are government numbers. They come from 3,551 people injured, and 413 people have died.
The humanitarian situation continues to devastate as the proposed truce has been ignored for the second time in less than 2 weeks. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is to meet the leader of the Rapid Support Forces for talks concerning the humanitarian situation in the country, and a visit that is expected to take place in the next hours after he had previously called for a 3-day truce.
Of explosions and gunfire showing that the fighting has never stopped. This is the military headquarters where the smoke is there in the sky, and also we are hearing gunfire and explosions. All of this place is trapped between camps, military camps.
Sudan's army declared that it was helping to evacuate foreign nationals from the country after a week of strife that has killed hundreds of civilians. The violence was triggered by disagreement over an internationally backed plan to form a new civilian government. Forces commanded by 2 previously allied leaders of Sudan's ruling council began a violent power struggle last weekend.
In the same context, as almost 20,000 Sudanese civilians have crossed border to the neighboring country, the World Food Programme expects more refugees to be evacuated from Sudan to Chad. Numbers are expected to reach 100,000 people as the conflict continues for the second week. It's worth mentioning that the army commander and president of the Sudanese Transitional Council has priorly declared that the Sudanese army is to help evacuate civilians and insisted that the leader of the Rapid Support Forces has to abide by the truce.
It's difficult to estimate, but we already have 10 to 20,000 people who are there, that's for sure. We think there are others who will come. It's almost certain. It's going to be really complicated. WFP were prepared to welcome at least 10,000. That's the first wave, but there could be many more, so you really have to stay close.
U.S. Under-Secretary of State Wendy Sherman met with the UN Secretary General's personal envoy for Western Sahara, Staffan de Mistura, to whom she expressed the full support of the United States for the process policy and the support of the United Nations. They also discussed the importance of building on the momentum of the practical UN-hosted consultations in March to achieve an enduring and dignified political solution for Western Sahara.
Deputy Secretary Wendy Sherman emphasized full U.S. support for the personal envoy's efforts to advance the ongoing UN-led political process for Western Sahara and welcomed the personal envoy's vision to intensify his consultations to this end.
High National Elections Commission in Libya renewed on Saturday what it described sincere determination and hard work for the success of the planned elections this year. This came in a congratulatory post on the occasion of Eid al-Fitr posted on its official Facebook page. The Electoral Commission stated that Libyans are looking forward to these elections to build a secure state based on democracy, and its goals are stability and development. Gunmen killed 5 Nigerian police officers and 2 civilians during an attack in southeastern Imo State on Friday. The latest incident in a state riven by gang and separatist violence. Armed groups have attacked police stations and government and electoral offices in states in the southeast, which the government often blames on the banned separatist indigenous people of Biafra. That is, Biafra Group. Indigenous people of Biafra denies the charges. Imo Police State spokesperson Henry Okoye confirmed the death of the officers and civilians, but did not give any further details. Kenyan police on Friday began exhuming remains from more than a dozen suspected graves in the east of the country thought to contain followers of a Christian cult who believed they would go to heaven if they starved themselves to death. Police marked the locations of the suspected graves with sticks and yellow tape. Police said that 15 rescued worshippers had been told to starve themselves to death so they could meet their Creator.
So disheartening and very inhuman to see what is going on here. Because at least since Monday we have been coming, there is no day we have not rescued alive. But all the people who have been coming here, I can see none of us have seen our relative, but we are just rescuing more people and seeing more graves.
2 men died and 10 others were injured after a fire at a restaurant in the Spanish capital, Madrid. Emergency services said on Saturday the blaze started late on Friday night at an Italian restaurant in the central neighborhood of Salamanca. According to eyewitnesses, the fire started after a waiter was flambeing a dish. The flames set fire to the walls and ceiling, and the Spanish police are investigating the cause of the fire. Climate change continued its advance in 2022 as droughts, floods, and heat waves affected many countries in Europe, as Italy and France and Spain face another year of an abnormally dry winter that has left riverbeds and lakes parched. And according to Catalan leader Pere, officials in Barcelona, and the surrounding region are dealing with one of the worst droughts in 50 years. Salman Nasir reports.
Climate change continued its advance in 2022 as droughts, floods, and heat waves affected communities on every continent and caused many billions of dollars of loss. Petri Talas, Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, says this negative trend in weather patterns and all these parameters may continue until 2060.
Unfortunately, this negative trend in weather patterns and all of these parameters may continue until 2060s, independent of our success in climate mitigation. We have already emitted so much of especially carbon dioxide to the atmosphere that this kind of phasing out of the negative trend takes several decades.
For its part, Spain's largest farmers' association underlined that severe droughts have damaged more than 35,000 square kilometers of crops in the country. And according to EU Copernicus scientists' report, 2022 was the fifth warmest year on record globally, including an anticipated return of the El Niño weather phenomenon that could drive temperatures higher in 2023. Catalan leader Pere Aragonés said that the officials in Barcelona and the surrounding regions are dealing with one of the worst droughts in 50 years.
At this point, it's the worst problem we're facing. It is an important and challenging crisis that is making the government worried.
In addition, other countries in Europe, including Italy and France, face another year of an abnormally dry winter that has left riverbeds and lakes parched.
2022 was the second warmest year on record, the warmest summer on record. We saw prolonged and extensive heat waves and also prolonged and extensive drought over much of the continent.
As for the consequences of this climate change crisis, ecologists in Spain have warned that farmers may soon be unable to maintain production of wheat and barley. Crops, such as olives and nuts, have also been impacted, and farmers are having difficulty providing irrigation for corn, sunflowers, rice, and cotton.
Climate change campaigners gathered outside Britain's Parliament during Earth Day on Saturday to urge action on global warming, while volunteers worldwide geared up to plant trees and clear trash to mark the 54th annual celebration of the environment. Earth Day this year follows weeks of extreme weather, with temperatures soaring to record highs in Thailand and a punishing heat wave in India, where at least 30 people died of heat stroke last weekend.
The reason I'm here is climate pollution, climate change and the climate emergency is causing pressure on the NHS. It's leading to lots of worsening of long-term conditions, and air pollution is causing many more deaths now and admissions to hospital. So it's critically important that we address climate change.
To other news now, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced on Saturday the capture of 3 new regions in Bakhmut and revealed that the death toll of Ukrainians and foreign recruits in the Donetsk reached 255. All the while, Kremlin indicated that Russia has drawn up plans to confront the G7 coming sanctions. Sofian Kanturi with more.
The war rages on, and 3 more districts in the western part of Bakhmut in the Donetsk region fell to the Russian control. This was announced by Russia's defense ministry on Saturday after Russian assault troops had captured the region. Airborne troops were restraining the Ukrainian units on the flanks and supported the actions of the assault squads to capture the cities, according to the same source.
The airborne troops were restraining the Ukrainian units on the flanks and supported the actions of the assault squads to capture the city.
As for the Ukrainian side, the General Staff revealed that its forces repelled more than 50 Russian attacks towards Avdiivka, Marinka and Bakhmut, which it described the epicenter of fierce fighting in the east of the country.
Ukrainian forces repelled more than 50 Russian attacks towards Avdiivka, Marinka and Bakhmut. During the past hours, Ukrainian forces inflicted heavy losses on Russian forces in the Luhansk region, where dozens of Russian soldiers were seriously wounded.
On a different level of the conflict, the Kremlin warned the new sanctions that the West is preparing will harm the global economy. In fact, Dmitry Peskov indicated that Russia has drawn up plans to confront these sanctions that will enable its economy to withstand.
We certainly take into account that both the United States and the European Union are actively considering new sanctions. We must not forget that no country in the world has faced the scale of sanctions that have been imposed on us. Therefore, we are adapting, developing, and making long-term plans.
Since Moscow sent its armed forces into Ukraine in February 2022, and the West retaliated with sanctions and weapons for Ukraine, relations between Russia and Europe, which used to be the largest buyer nations of Russian oil and gas, have deteriorated.
Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva said on Saturday he does not want to please anyone with his views about Russia-Ukraine war, and the Portuguese President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, who stood next to Lula at the news conference, said the country's stance on the war were different.
I don't want to please anyone. I just want to find a way to bring both of them to the table. It seemed impossible, but it happened in the Second World War. When it seemed they were not going to talk, they talked. You don't have to destroy the world to find peace. You don't have to destroy it. This war should not have started. Russia should not have invaded, but it invaded.
As he strives to improve foreign ties and Brazil's image abroad, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva said on Saturday his country was back after being isolated from the world during Jair Bolsonaro's 4 years in office. Lula also met Portugal's Prime Minister António Costa to sign 13 agreements related to technology, energy transition, tourism, culture, and education.
Eu quero, primeiro-ministro, que saiba o seguinte: no que depender de mim.
I wanted to tell you how happy I am. Brazil spent almost 6 years, especially in the last 4 years, isolated from the world. We had a government that didn't travel because nobody wanted to welcome it, and didn't welcome anyone because nobody wanted to visit. So Brazil was isolated. Maybe it was the most rejected country on earth, as nobody wanted to welcome it.
During an interview with China's Central Television, Vice President of El Salvador said reports by Western mainstream media have been spreading biased or negative narratives about the country, with some interviews even being quoted out of context to fit this narrative. When reporting on El Salvador, Western mainstream media often mention its illegal immigration to other countries, gangs and corruption, and refer to the country as the Bitcoin nation, as it, in 2021, became the first country in the world to formally adopt cryptocurrency Bitcoin as legal tender.
Should be in the West, let's say in the United States or some European media, report some issues that are not the truth. Sometimes I have given some interviews to some of them, and I have to regret that sometimes they misquote me when they take some phrases out of context in order to adapt the narrative.
The Philippines and China pledged on Saturday to work together to resolve their maritime differences in the South China Sea, where the two have competing claims, and to deepen bilateral ties. Philippine Foreign Affairs Secretary Enrique Manalo said he began talks with his Chinese counterpart. Manila's relations with Beijing are more than just their differences over the South China Sea.
Our leaders have agreed that our differences in the West Philippine Sea are not the sum total of our relations. These differences should not prevent us from seeking ways of managing them effectively, especially with respect to the enjoyment of rights of Filipinos, especially fishermen or fisherfolk, whose livelihood and general well-being are undermined by incidents and actions in the West Philippine Sea.
China is ready to work with the Philippines to truly implement the consensus between the presidents of the two countries, keep the general direction of the China-Philippines relations steady, and maintain the overall picture of bilateral relations.
Consumers and business owners across Japan complained about the soaring commodity prices, which have brought heavy pressure on their daily life and business operation. The government said in a report released on Friday that core consumer prices jumped to 3.1% in March from a year earlier, with prices of food and durable goods surging. According to the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, the food prices jumped 8.2% in March, the largest increase in over 46 years, with those for durable goods surging 9.4%. All the way to the Middle East now, Palestinians in Gaza Strip celebrate Eid al-Fitr despite the repercussions of the blockade imposed on them, where their troubles multiply with every occasion they celebrate. Islam Said has more.
The streets are crowded and the markets of Gaza Strip are packed as Palestinians celebrate Eid al-Fitr after ending the fasting holy month of Ramadan. Due to the current economic environment and lockdown, people in the Gaza Strip tend to buy from small stalls and cheap popular markets, as the prices of some items have doubled compared to the previous year due to the Zionist blockade for the 17th year in a row.
I came to the market to buy Eid supplies, but unfortunately with the current economic environment and lockdown, we cannot afford expensive products. Despite the difficult economic conditions we live in, we still have to buy something.
Despite the lockdown, this religious occasion draws a picture of joy in the faces of Gazans, where colors and drawings fill the neighborhoods of the Strip to celebrate.
Eid al-Fitr is full of joy, so we decorated our neighborhood to welcome the Eid and give the children in Gaza joy and pleasure in their celebration of the happy Eid.
As Eid al-Fitr arrives, it awakens painful memories for many Gazans, who some of whom began their holiday by visiting the graves of their relatives who died as a result of the 11-day Zionist massacre, where 300 Palestinians were killed, including 70 minors.
For us, the families of martyrs, Eid al-Fitr arrives with a very sad scene, a scene of pain and loss. I lost an entire family on this day. I hope that the Zionist occupation will be tried. We have submitted complaints to the International Criminal Court. We hope that they will look into these complaints and this criminal occupier will be tried for their heinous crimes.
In spite of the ongoing Zionist aggression and violations against them, Palestinians evoke Eid's value and its atmosphere as a sign of resistance away from tragedies and sadness that hangs over the Strip.
Muslims in 13 countries around the world like Libya, Oman, Australia, Singapore, India and Iran celebrated the first day of Eid al-Fitr on Saturday after it was not possible to prove the moon sighting for Shawwal, that is the lunar calendar of 1444, while other countries celebrated the first day of Eid al-Fitr on Friday. Zara Farjani with more.
13 countries in the Muslim world celebrated Saturday as the first day of Eid al-Fitr, after it was not possible to prove the moon sighting of Shawwal 1444 of the Hijri calendar based on astronomical calculations. Hence, countries such as Libya, Oman, Australia, Singapore, India and Iran completed the 30th day of fasting in the holy month of Ramadan. Saturday morning in South Asia witnessed thousands of Muslims gathering in some of the largest mosques as well as in open ground to take part of Eid al-Fitr prayers, asking Almighty Allah for peace and unity.
It's so amazing. The atmosphere is so warm. We all can meet each other to carry out Eid prayers together, hoping unity of the Muslim people can be maintained.
I want to pray for peace and unity in the country. I pray our thousands of years old composite culture is restored and our country progress in every scope.
I prayed for peace in Bangladesh so that everyone can live in peace. I prayed to Allah to accept everyone's fasting.
This joyful festival of breaking a whole month of fasting puts together families to celebrate with their loved ones after a long period of COVID restrictions.
Regarding Eid prayers, I'm very happy that we're free of COVID restrictions now. We also can meet our loved ones.
I hope it gets better from here on and that we can gather together with our families. After the last 3 years of not being able to go back to our hometown, we are planning on going after Eid.
The dates for the first days of Eid al-Fitr vary according to the moon sighting in several countries of the Islamic world. The celebrations in turn vary as well to make Eid al-Fitr a single occasion with diverse traditions.
And finally, in our news, Australia's Defence Minister Richard Marles said on Saturday that the wreck of a Japanese merchant ship sunk in World War II with 864 Australian soldiers on board had been found in the South China Sea, ending a tragic chapter in the country's history. The ship was torpedoed on the way from what is now Papua New Guinea to China's Hainan by a US submarine, and aware of the prisoners of war on board before it sank off the Philippines coast in July 1942 in what is considered to be Australia's worst maritime disaster.
I can now confirm that the SS Montevideo Maru has now been found. And this brings to an end one of the most tragic chapters in Australia's maritime history. This tragedy saw the single biggest loss of life of Australians at sea in our history. And since then, the absence of a location of the Montevideo Maru has represented unfinished business for the families of those who lost their lives, until now, when finally those families have closure.
With this, our news program comes to an end. For me and the rest of the team, thank you for watching, and goodbye for now.